Greetings and wishes to all who watch our presentation. The topic for our e-content is Shakespeare Women, and now let us see an intro about Shakespeare. Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet and actor regarded as the greatest writer in the English language and the world's greatest dramatist. He is often called England's national poet and the bard of Avon. Shakespeare's family life. At the age of 18, William married Anne Hathaway, a young woman from the village of Shortry, just outside Stratford-upon-Avon. William and Anne Shakespeare had 3 children. Susanna was born 6 months after their marriage, followed by twins Judith and Hamnet in 1585. Shakespeare career. Shakespeare began a successful career in London as an actor, writer, and part owner of a playing company called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, later known as the King's Men. At age 49, around 1613, he appears to have retired to Stratford. And below we can see the picture of the company. What made Shakespeare famous? Many people believe William Shakespeare is the best British writer of all time. His many works are about life, love, death, revenge, grief, jealousy, murder, magic and mystery. He wrote the blockbuster plays of his day, and some of his most famous are Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet. Which is Shakespeare's longest and shortest play? The longest play is Hamlet, which is the only Shakespeare play with more than 30,000 words, and the shortest is A Comedy of Errors, which is the only play with fewer than 15,000 words. Shakespeare's 37 plays have an average word count of 22.6 thousand words per play. And 5 facts to know about William Shakespeare are: Shakespeare's father held a lot of different jobs and at one point got paid to drink beer. Second one, Shakespeare married an older woman who was 3 months pregnant at that time. Third, Shakespeare's parents were probably illiterate and his children almost certainly were. Fourth, nobody knows what Shakespeare did between 1585 and 1592. Fifth, Shakespeare plays feature the first written instances of hundreds of familiar terms. When did Shakespeare die and how did he die? Tradition holds that Shakespeare died on his 52nd birthday, April 23, 1616, but some scholars believe this is a myth. Church records show he was interred at Trinity Church on April 25, 1616. The picture of Shakespeare tombstone is
The age of Shakespeare. The whole period extending from the accession of Elizabeth in 1558 to the death of James I in 1625. These 67 years fall naturally into 3 divisions: the first 21 years of the Queen's reign, the 24 years between the publication of Spencer's Shepherd's Calendar and the death, and the 22 years of the reign of James I.
The first division, the time of preparation or the springtide of Elizabethan literature. The second, its time of full fruition or summer. The third, its time of decline or autumn. In the first 2 divisions only that the term Elizabethan should be applied, while the proper designation for the third is Jacobean. But from the point of view of literary development, there are good reasons why Elizabethan and Jacobean should alike be included in the general phrase that we use now.
By virtue of its wonderful fertility and of the variety of its production, this period as a whole ranks as one of the greatest in the annals of the world literature. Influences were everywhere at work which tended to expand thought, stir the feelings, dilate the imagination, nourishing as well as stimulating genius.
Spirit of Shakespearean age. The age in which men lived intensely, thought intensely, and wrote intensely. At a such time, when passion was strong and speculation was rife, and a great public existed eager to respond to the appeal of genius. Everything conspired to bring out of each man the best that was in him. And whatever might be the individual quality of his work, the fullness and many-sidedness of the life about him were certain to be reflected.
Women's role in Shakespearean age.
In Elizabethan times, women belonged to their fathers or their brothers if their father died, and then to their husbands. Women could not own property of their own. The only exceptions were widows. A widow was in charge of her own life and property, but would be like to marry again to find someone to protect her and to be the legal guardian to her children. Women were allowed to marry from the age of 12 in Shakespeare's time, but often only women from wealthy families would marry so young. In the play Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is 13, but her mother says by that age she was already married with a child. Women were not allowed on the stage. All the female parts in plays at the time were played by the boys whose voice had not broken yet. In several of the plays, the female characters disguised themselves as men, so the audience would have seen a woman pretending to be a man. Examples: Twelfth Night, As You Like It, and The Merchant of Venice. Culture of women in education. Women from wealthy and noble families were sometimes allowed the privilege of education. Women who were commoners would not have attended school or received any formal type of education. They have to learn how to household and become skilled in all house duties. Women would be expected to marry and would be depend on her male relatives throughout her life. In marriage, women were expected to bring a dowry to the marriages. A dowry was an amount of money, goods, and property that the bride would bring to the marriages. After marriage, they have to take care of their husband and children. Unmarried women could spend their life in a convent or a nunnery. The other option was domestic service. Role of women in society. Women were raised to believe that they were inferior to men. The church believed this and quoted the Bible in order to ensure the continued adherence to this principle. The Protestant leader John Knox wrote, "Woman in her greatest perfection was made to serve and obey man." They were totally dominated by the male members and they were expected to instantly obey not only their father but also all male members in the family. The disobey was the wiping stool. Girls were beaten into submission, and disobedience was seen as a crime against their religion. Though women were dominated in Shakespeare's time, some women like Elizabeth were proved their talent. Some of the examples among them.
In order to proceed in exploring the women's role in Shakespearean plays, one should consider first the social context to which they belong, that is, the Elizabethan society, as well as the theme and the plot in which they appear. Women who attempted to assert their views were seen as a threat to social order. Here we can see the difference between low-class and high-class women. Despite the power of Elizabeth I, women during this time had very little authority, autonomy, or recognition. Women gained their status based on the position of either their father or their husband. Even more restricting than economic rights were the social and political rights of women. They were expected to be silent observers, submissive to their husbands. This is significant in that the maintenance of social order was an extremely important aspect of Elizabethan society.
Women in Shakespeare is a topic within the especially general discussion of Shakespeare's dramatic and poetic works. Main characters such as Dark Lady of the Sonnets have elicited a substantial amount of criticism which received added impetus during the second wave feminism of the 1960s. A considerable number of book-length studies and academic articles investigate the topic, and several moons of winners are named after women in Shakespeare.
Shakespeare's presentation of women. In Shakespeare's play, women are often underestimated. While they were clearly restricted by their social roles, the bard showed how women could influence the men around them. His plays showed the difference in expectations and mode of life between the upper and lower class women of the time. High-born women are presented as positions to be passed between their fathers and husbands. In most cases, they are socially restricted and unable to explore the world around them without chaperones. Many of these women were coerced and controlled by the men in their lives. On the other hand, low-born women were allowed more freedom in their actions precisely because they are seen as less important than higher-born women.
Sexuality in Shakespeare's work. Broadly speaking, female characters that are sexually aware are more likely to be lower class. Shakespeare allows them more freedom to explore their sexuality, perhaps because their low status renders them socially harmless. However, women are never totally free in Shakespeare's plays. If not owned by husbands and fathers, many low-class characters are owned by their employers. Sexuality can also lead to deadly consequences for Shakespeare's women. Desdemona chose to follow her passion and defied her father to marry Othello. This passion is later used against her when the villain Iago convinces her husband that if she would lie to her father, she would lie to him as well. Wrongfully accused of adultery, nothing Desdemona says or does is enough to convince Othello of her faithfulness. Her boldness in choosing to defy her father ultimately leads to her death at the hands of her jealous lover.
Sexual violence. Sexual violence also plays a major role in some of the bard's work. This is seen most notably in Titus Andronicus, where the character Lavinia is violently raped and mutilated. Her attackers cut out her tongue and remove her hands to prevent her from naming her attackers. After she is able to write the names, her father then kills her to preserve her honor.
Women in power. Women in power are treated with distrust by Shakespeare. They have questionable morals. For example, Gertrude in Hamlet marries her husband's murdering brother, and Lady Macbeth coerces her husband into murder. These women show a list for power that's often on par or surpassing that of the men around them. Lady Macbeth especially is seen as a conflict between masculine and feminine. She forgoes normal feminine traits like motherly compassion for more masculine ones like ambition, which leads to the ruin of a family. For those women, the penalty for their scheming ways is normally death.
Shakespeare is highly sensitive to his target audience in every step of the writing process. He actively plays upon the beliefs and fears of the Elizabethans. With characters such as Goneril in the play King Lear and Cleopatra in the play Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare demonstrates the devastating effects of female rebellion against the social order. Shakespeare involves sympathy in the audience by creating characters of extreme feminine virtue such as Cordelia and Miranda. However, Shakespeare often creates ambiguous emotions in the audience by introducing an element of intelligence and boldness in the characters like Isabella and Desdemona.
Women like Beatrice, Rosalind, Viola are strong female characters from the Shakespeare's play. Paulina, The Winter's Tale. She's got a lot of gumption. She fights for justice. It's probably safe to call her a saint. Cordelia, King Lear. She forgives both her husband and the man who was the cause of all their troubles instantly. Some may think that's a weakness, but sometimes the ability to forgive and let go is a strength few can possess. Miranda, the Tempest. Miranda is one of those who might not be an obvious choice, but she is an example of proper woman. Miranda is also a brave woman and is willing to stand up for what she believes in. She also fights for her love for Ferdinand despite her belief that her father is against such a union.
Margaret? Margaret is a woman character who appears in Henry IV and Richard III.
Cleopatra from Antony and Cleopatra.
Catherine in The Taming of the Shrew.
Celia, the important character in As You Like It.
Rosalind. Rosalind is also a woman character who appears in As You Like It.
Jessica from the play The Merchant of Venice.
Olivia from Twelfth Night.
Jealousy from Othello.
Juliet is a young and innocent teenage girl in Romeo and Juliet.
Lady Macbeth, a leading character in the tragedy Macbeth.
Helena. Helena is a character who appears in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Portia, the major character in The Merchant of Venice.
Bianca from Othello.
Viola, the protagonist of the play Twelfth Night.
Cordelia in King Lear.
The Three Witches, the weird sisters in Shakespeare's tragedy Macbeth.
Isabella in the play Measure for Measure.